Welcome this morning to the Belfast Business Survey Results launch for Autumn 23. This survey is completed on a biannual basis and commissioned jointly between Belfast Chamber and Belfast City Council. The response rate was strong and we are really grateful to those of you who took the time to contribute. Belfast Chamber's purpose is to create the best economic environment for our members to flourish. With Belfast accounting for over 30% of the region's GDP, and with a travel to work population of over 1 million, a better Belfast really does make for a better Northern Ireland. With that in mind, it's imperative we regularly check the pulse of our business community and listen intently to direct our efforts in the most meaningful way for business growth. Our partner Belfast City Council are equally committed to improving and growing the city economy. I would like to introduce Kieran Higgins, who is the Enterprise and Business Growth Officer with Belfast City Council, for a few comments prior to the survey results being released. Kieran.
Thanks, Claire. Kirsty, could you maybe share my slide there, please? Yeah, so look, you're all very welcome. My name is Kieran Higgins, Enterprise and Business Growth Officer, and I manage this survey on behalf of Belfast City Council. I just wanted to take some time just at the start, just to kind of remind people of why we're doing this, how we do it, and how we use the research. As Claire said there, it's a survey that we conduct twice a year. This is our 5th survey wave, and we really use that information to keep us informed on business sentiment and to take the temperature of businesses, how they're performing, what challenges they face currently in the city. And we're also looking at trends. So it's a longitudinal survey. So it gives us a chance to look back over the last 5 survey waves and compare and pick out what's been kind of consistent and an issue that's frequently come up for businesses. We do then work in partnership and collaborate with other organizations such as the Chamber. And we share this information then just to kind of emphasize to people, if you're completing this data, it is useful to other organizations as well. Particularly to get that kind of primary data related to Belfast, because there is a lot of surveys that are Northern Ireland wide, or they're conducted on an annual basis. So this, I mean, for example, this is really kind of quite fresh data. Like, we completed the survey at the start of November. So we do then use the research alongside other sources of data. And we have city centre footfall information, the likes of feedback from our own interventions and projects that we would carry out with businesses. And then we do comparisons with other similar surveys, like there is the Enterprise Northern Ireland Business Barometer that was launched there last week, and the Northern Ireland Chamber's quarterly survey. They're Northern Ireland data sources, but it's useful to kind of sense check in terms of if there's any divergence between what businesses in Belfast is saying compared to the rest of Northern Ireland. I'd just like to emphasize as well that in this survey, it's slightly different, this survey wave, because I think there was a recognition in the spring that, the survey was taken a good while for people to complete. That's the kind of feedback we got. And maybe there's a bit of survey fatigue setting in. And we do value people's time. So we try to make sure that this is concise. It's a relatively short survey, but it still is done in a kind of a very kind of scientific and kind of the approach that we take to do it gets us a good representative and baseline of businesses that are in the city. Kirsty, could you just maybe pop on to the next slide? So finally, I'll just finish up in terms of looking at what maybe some current initiatives, what we do, or what we kind of draw out from the survey results to try and influence our own kind of interventions. For example, we have a new enterprise support service that's Northern Ireland wide called Go Succeed that just launched this month. And that's a very flexible and responsive service to support businesses at various stages, whether you're starting a business and considering becoming an entrepreneur, or you want to grow a business, or depending on the particular sectors. And for example, with Belfast City Council, we can look from these survey results and things. Are there particular masterclasses or topical events, or can we use it to kind of shape programs or guide it in a particular direction? So, for example, we have masterclasses around chat GPT, leadership skills, and winning public sector tenders available currently. And I'd encourage you to go and check that out and register. Recruitment and upskilling staff. That's always a consistent challenge, and it's something that, looking back in these surveys, frequently comes through. And just a reminder that we've got a dedicated employability and skills service and staff in the council here that very much are interested in working with employers and SMEs in particular to identify skills gaps and try and plug those gaps and help them to recruit and train up their staff. The council also leads on the Belfast Labour Market Partnership, and we use data gathered from these surveys and from other consultations and stakeholder engagement to look at emerging trends in the labour market. And one initiative that I just wanted to point out to you that we're at an advanced stage is developing an employer navigation service, and that's aimed at SMEs to help them kind of get through the whole skills and training ecosystem and to find out exactly what is relevant to their business. So this kind of information helps kind of like us shape that and gives it that strong evidence base. Frequently then there's business support needs around IT and competitiveness. That comes up often as a challenge to businesses, and looking back at the trends. And today actually we're launching along with the other partner councils around Northern Ireland, the EU Digital Transformation Flexible Fund that opens today. It's a capital fund aimed at SMEs so that they can buy equipment or software to help digital transformation of their business. And again, I'd encourage you maybe to check that out and to log in the website and check the eligibility and apply. We do ask questions then, as you know, around issues affecting the neighbourhood and where businesses are located. And in the summer of 2022, Council launched a cleansing task force, and that's still ongoing. And we work with other partners, including the likes of the BIDS, to ensure that Belfast is a clean city. And there's also, in terms of looking at vacancy and dereliction, we have initiatives such as Vacant to Vibrant. It's a small-scale capital fund that's actually 14 organisations have been successful in applying for that to date, and that's to try and refurbish, city centre businesses and bring them back into use. So look, I just want to give that reflection there, Claire, in terms of like why we're doing this and how we use that information, and just to thank people for completing the survey and to say that it is used by us and other partners to help businesses. So maybe I'll just hand over then to Kirsty to just go through the actual survey and give you the results for our autumn survey now.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Kieran. So as Kieran said, I'm just going to talk you through the results that we received in the latest wave. So before I do that, I'll just talk you through a bit on the methodology. So we launched a survey on the 4th of October and closed on the 11th of November. So as Kieran said, it is a very, very recent results here. We talked to people online and telephone. So there's 2 ways that people can complete the survey. And we always aim to get a balanced, robust and representative response that reflects the profile of the local economy. So we use weighting to make sure it's reflective of the businesses that are in Belfast. Payroll size as well, that's very similar to what we got last time. So we tend to get about half micro businesses, size 0 to 9, 38% small businesses and 11% medium to large. And this wave we had 421 responses. So that was again an increase in what we saw in the spring there. So just to move on to the next slide, which markets the businesses trade in. So nearly all, so 90% trade in Belfast and Northern Ireland, with other UK markets and Republic of Ireland around that quarter mark, and other EU markets and other overseas markets are at just over the 10% mark there. So that's kind of broadly, so that kind of shows which markets everyone trades in. So looking at the figures here, most trade in multiple markets because this adds up to more than 100% there. Okay, just moving on to the next slide. We asked generally how turnover had changed to businesses over the past 6 months and how they expected it to change in the next 6 months. And looking at these figures, they're very similar between the turnover experienced and what they expect to experience in the next 6 months. And this is broadly comparable with what we saw in the spring for Belfast and Northern Ireland and other areas of the UK. So we changed the question slightly, but it is in line with what we saw back in the spring for these results here. So when we move on to profitability, just ask businesses generally how they felt their profitability changed over the last 6 months and how they expect it to change. So these aren't quite as high for the increase, those saying that they think it's going to increase, as we saw looking at the turnover levels. But there's a little bit of optimism looking forward for this. So 26% said it increased over the past 6 months, and 29% expect it to increase in the coming 6 months. And again, this is broadly comparable with the results we saw in the spring wave. Just moving on to the next slide. So these questions were asked about how many businesses export outside of Northern Ireland. So it was around a third said they exported outside of Northern Ireland. And then we asked those businesses how their turnover and profitability in the export markets, how that was over the last 6 months. So looking at the figures on the right of this chart, turnover increased over the past 6 months. So that's at 44%. And just comparing that back to a few slides ago, this was 38% for more generally. So how businesses turnover was more generally. Profitability again is at a higher level for export markets compared to more generally here. So we just thought we'd flag that there. Moving on to the next slide. So this is one we've had on since the very start of the survey. So you can see that we've got a real longitudinal look at this one. So we asked businesses how they thought their economic prospects in the next 6 months would be for their own business, their business sector, and the Belfast city economy. So if we look first at their own business, it's pretty much in line with the spring results. It has seen an improvement on last year, where it was at 20% who thought it would get better, and it's gone up to 32% there. So it's a real positive growth from a year ago. The results from the previous year, that was coming out of COVID. So I think there was a lot of optimism after people have been through that the COVID years almost, and kind of getting out of that. There was a lot of optimism that they thought it'd get better. So, but we are from a year ago seeing that looking really positive there. For the business sector, we see a similar pattern when we compare to a year ago. It's from 17% to 22%, and for the Belfast city economy versus a year ago, it's gone from 9% and 14%. But this is the only wave where we've seen a little bit of a decline versus the spring wave for that optimism. So it's just worth keeping an eye on that in future waves. So hopefully that'll bounce back again. But that's the only one that's seen a little bit of decline in the shorter term. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, where we asked which business costs that they expected to increase over the last 6 months. And this is another question, again, we've had on since the start for most of the answers. So you'll see that the main answer does remain they expect an increase in, they've had an increase, in business costs over the last 6 months for their fuel, electricity, energy, and wholesale prices. But these figures have come down a little in the last few waves. So 2 waves ago, that was at 99% had an increase for the first answer, fuel, electricity, energy, whereas it's now at 88%. So it feels like potentially that's not having as big an impact as it did do when you know that initial cost of living crisis really hit. People are maybe getting used to it a little bit more. There's also decreases in so the levels of business debt has remained steady as well. So this is something we also asked about, how they're managing their business debt, and we've seen this remain quite stable for the last few waves. It's been around 2/3 for the last 3 waves there, so that's not changed too much in the recent waves. So this slide shows a new question we asked this wave, asking about the rising interest rate and what impact that might have had on their business. So is it limited their ability to raise finance or delayed investment decisions? We see that 15% said it had a significant impact, 23% said it had a limited impact, but encouragingly, almost 42% said it's had no impact. So most people are in that kind of no impact box, but there is a fair proportion that have had a limited or significant impact on them, on their decision making there. Okay, moving on to the next slide, where we ask what business challenges they faced, and they're asked to choose their top 5 challenges. So we see that political uncertainty remains the biggest business challenge, but staff recruitment and paying overheads are again in the top 3, and they've kind of consistently remained in those top 3 for the last few waves. Looking at the longer term, both staff recruitment and paying overheads have trended up as well. So kind of 2 years ago, paying overheads was quite low down the list, whereas that's last 3 waves, that's consistently be at 38% of businesses selecting that. So that's worth just being aware of there. Okay, so on the next slide, we ask about expected changes in staffing levels in the next 6 months. And this is one that, again, in the shorter term, we've not seen too much change for this one, with most saying that they're expecting it to stay broadly the same. And with the level of redundancies has always been around that 5% kind of level there. And the last few waves as well, hiring staff has been, kind of in the mid to higher 20s. So not too much change within this one. So the next slide, we ask what business advice or support needs they're expecting or they would like support with. And just wanting to flag here that 3 of the top 4 answers are related to staff. So improving staff skills, recruiting, or employee health and well-being. There's a real kind of focus on kind of not just recruiting staff, but keeping the staff they've got upskilled and happy as well. So that's really important to flag there. And that's kind of consistently come through over previous waves as well. Also, marketing and advertising is another one that's actually been more important the last couple of waves to businesses here, that they'd like a bit of advice and support there. Okay. So next slide, we ask about what issues, neighbourhood issues that they've experienced, and just highlighting the major issues on this slide here that they selected. So the main one that came through this wave and did last wave as well was car parking, with 27% selecting that one, followed by antisocial behaviour and street cleanliness and building condition. But it's interesting to kind of point out that the street cleanliness was at 30% in like the survey we did almost just over a year ago, but it's declined over the last few waves, and it's now not the major issue that businesses are facing. So that's one that has slowly been declining over the last few waves, and it's now kind of equal third as an issue here. So this is a topical question we added this wave, asking about have businesses introduced more automation using AI tools such as ChatGPT, and a 5th said they had. And amongst that 5th, we asked them in what ways do they expect this technology to have an impact on their business. And the main answers selected here were the more positive answers, such as increasing efficiency, supporting innovation, and enhancing customer experiences, whereas the ones that were more of a concern, almost like threaten the viability and increase cyber security risk, were at the bottom of the list there, just above too early to say. So people are seeing kind of these new technologies as likely to have a positive impact on their businesses, as opposed to more of a risk. So just flagging that. So just moving on to summing up. So key findings here. So just first point here is just highlighting, when thinking about their own business sector or Belfast city economy, there is more optimism compared to the wave last year, with results broadly in line with what we saw in the spring. There's a relatively stable picture for Belfast businesses, turnover and profitability at similar levels seen to last wave, and more optimism as well seen this wave compared to a year ago. Turnover and profitability seen in the last 6 months were at higher levels for export markets than is seen more generally for businesses. Staff recruitment, retention and upskilling are areas that remain a concern. And this is what we've seen kind of consistently over previous waves as well. there's no real change expected to staffing levels needed, and 68% of businesses are expecting their staffing levels to remain the same. But there's a focus not just on recruitment when they do need to recruit, it's on keeping people upskilled and happy that work for them. So political uncertainty and paying overheads still concerning businesses. Fuel, electricity, energy remains business costs that has increased the most, like people have said, increased the most over the last 6 months, although slightly less businesses are agreeing with that this wave. Rising interest rate has had an impact on 38% of Belfast businesses, but 42% said these haven't had an impact on their ability to raise finance or making them have to delay investment decisions. And then a fifth of businesses have introduced more automation in the past 6 months, with those businesses expecting this technology to increase efficiency, support innovation, and enhance the customer experience instead of having a negative impact on their business. So that's just an overview of the data here. So I think we're moving on to the kind of Q&A session. Back to Claire.
Kirsty, thanks very much. Look, some really useful insights there. From my own perspective, I'm delighted to see actually the positive and uptick actually in use of automation, because I do believe that that's really important for our future businesses and remaining relevant and efficient. Also the uptick in exports, or so it seems from that survey wave. We really must be an outward focused economy. Just a couple of words. The cleanliness is, and I know it was slightly down the list in terms of the survey, but it's still very, very high on the agenda of our Belfast Chamber members. And I just wanted to remind everybody that Belfast Chamber is involved in the operational task force, which is a multi-agency approach led by Belfast City Council, but we're extremely active on it and making sure that those city centre safety and cleanliness issues are very much high on the agenda. Literally a hygiene factor for us, and very, very important. So despite the fact that things have clearly improved as the survey shows, but that remains very, very important to all of our members. I would welcome questions now from those listening. Please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. And just the Q&A panel is bolstered by David Chong Ping, who is the local Government Research Director at MEL Research. He'll join Kirsty, and also Karen Bonner, who's the Principal Economist with Ulster University. And Karen, if I can just, while we're waiting for a few questions to come in, if I can maybe come to yourself and David briefly first. Karen, just as Principal Economist and from your perspective, what were the key sort of reflections that you thought were significant in the survey results?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Yes, we're still obviously operating in a very challenging economic climate, but I do think there were quite a few positives coming out of the survey. I think even if you go back to those first questions around turnover in the last 6 months, I mean, we had a sizable chunk there of businesses who said the turnover had increased. It was just under 2/5, and around a third who said turnover had stayed the same. And actually, when trading conditions are so difficult, to even maintain your level of turnover, I think is a real testament to the businesses. Then looking forward, that question around, over the next 6 months, there was a much lower share of businesses who expected turnover to decrease. So again, I think there's some optimism sort of coming back there. I know a lot of the results were similar to the spring survey, but actually if you go back and compare it to a year ago, to the sort of autumn last year, and that's when we had very high inflation, energy costs were sort of around their peak. You can really see the difference, a year on. You can see some of those costs maybe starting to come down. It's great that you have the 5 waves of the survey, because especially when you look at that one on the costs, it's almost like a hump over the 5 waves. So last autumn, we were at the peak of where businesses were really impacted, and that's the pressure sort of starting to come down a little bit now. I think other positives, as you pointed out there, the exporting one is really important, really interesting, that a higher share of businesses who export said that turnover had increased and profitability had increased as well. And as you said, I think that really points to the importance of, having a diversified sort of customer base across different markets, looking for opportunities in export markets. And I think that's particularly important when, for example, at the moment, the Northern Ireland and UK economy is performing quite weakly. So when you do have a very slow growing domestic economy, if you're able to sell elsewhere that perhaps isn't as constrained, you can still get demand from those other markets. So I thought that was a real positive. And again, just to pick up another one you said there about the AI, I thought that was really interesting. And Kirsty made the point as well about the fact that businesses using AI had really seen the positives of it. I know there were a few in there who thought it might be a threat to their viability, but on the whole, most of the businesses were seeing that they could use it for innovation to improve efficiencies. So I think that's a real positive, that they're looking to actually, engage in these new technologies to help their own business.
And that's useful, Karen. And I suppose from your perspective as well, I mean, we've got, myself and Kieran, the Chamber and the Council, very, very focused here on listening and reacting. And I suppose, are there any sort of key nuggets in there for you that you'd sort of say, look, actually, you two should get your head together and do a wee bit extra on this, that, or the other? Is there anything really screaming out at you there?
Yeah, I think if you look at the challenges and then the question around what business supports that are needed, there's some sort of overlap there. I think that whole recruitment piece, and I know that's come up in previous surveys as well. That's a difficult one in and of itself to kind of solve. We're in a very tight labour market throughout Northern Ireland, actually throughout the UK. So it's very difficult to ease recruitment pressures. I think maybe if there's some supports around how you might help businesses to maybe draw from a wider labour pool, maybe draw in people who are maybe removed from, who've been out of work for a while or harder to reach people, is there something there to just expand where you can draw, staff from? I know Kieran mentioned a few initiatives at the start, which I thought was great. I think as well, there are so many different initiatives out there. There's maybe something in maybe a webinar, which just is an informational, here's the different types of support. If you need support, you can access X, Y, and Z. I think quite often there's nearly so much out there. It's difficult for businesses to know where to go to.
That's a really good practical point, Karen, actually, because especially in a lot of the survey results, as we saw, were micro and small businesses, which is the backbone of our economy. And quite frankly, if you're running a small business and you're up to your eyes and you just don't have time to scour around to see which sort of supports are relevant. So maybe we could do some more work in directing the relevant supports like that. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think as well around that, I know Kieran mentioned the skills academies. Because the support around skill needs came out, I think that was the top one. I think it might be interesting to go back to see, because that could cover a diverse range of skills. So maybe are there common types of skills that companies are needing help with, and maybe do some targeted, webinars or seminars or programs around those particular, the ones.
Yeah.
Could I just come in there on that one, just to say as well, like in the survey, we do ask people to respond to tick a box to say if they want to participate in further follow-up research. And then I can share that with my colleagues in our employability and skills teams, because they will come to me and then say, like, we want to do more of a deep dive into a particular skills interventions or training needs and that. And I actually we have made use of that, and we've done focus groups and stuff, for example, with MEL around stuff around exporting or social economy and that. So there is kind of follow-up research that we can do on this, but it's important for businesses just in terms of like data protection and GDPR that they do tick that box to say that they want to or they're happy to kind of discuss it further with us.
No problem. David, I was going to bring you in now anyway. Thank you, Karen, for that. David, you've obviously the fifth wave of this survey. So it'd be good to, in addition to whatever you were going to say, David, please say that anyway. But also please give us your reflections in terms of, your role as local government lead in MEL.
Thank you very much. And in essence, Karen and Kieran have pretty much stolen my thunder. So I'll reiterate really what I was going to say. As a research agency, one of the things when we are doing work for clients and doing surveys is we often we don't like doing work where it's a tick box exercise where they're just doing it because they think they should. What I'm really impressed with is the way that the council and the chamber and its partners have actually reacted to the results. So we talked about cleanliness and the cleanliness task force that has been put in place. We talked about exporting, which Kieran's just mentioned. Back in the autumn, August, September, the export team at the council ran some focus groups with people who participate in the survey to understand what type of support would help those that are just new to exporting or want to export. So they are looking at solutions to try and really heighten that fact that exporting has increased and it's more profitable compared to domestic markets. So, what we're actually seeing is real use of the results and the data that's coming out being put into practice rather than it just being a report that sits on a shelf. We've done this exercise now. And that's the same with the AI that you also mentioned there, the Go Succeed program, and that looking at, the webinars and other things to allow people to understand a little bit more about what it can do, how it might work, what benefits it might give to their businesses, but also reflecting presumably on some of those wider challenges as well. But of all of those improving efficiencies, etc., it's these type of things are fantastic tools, but where do you start? As Claire, you mentioned, wearing many hats, small businesses and micro businesses in particular, juggling so many things, actually seeing the proactivity of the partners here, putting things in place based on the evidence that's coming out is, just a welcoming thing for us as researchers, because it is really using the data to formulate what happens and what plans are put in place. So really, that's my reflection on it. And it's good to see that over time, different initiatives and interventions are being considered and put in place to help support business growth.
No, that's useful. Thanks for those comments, David. But look, at the end of the day, we're all about impact. These surveys and all of our endeavours are useless unless they're actually making a difference. So we have to keep, and that's one of the reasons why, continuing to check in and continuing to ask the business community what is it that they're facing and what are their key challenges and what are the need is absolutely imperative for us. David, just before I open up to the questions here, I've only got a couple in, but I was just going to ask you too, in terms of the fact that this is the fifth wave of the survey, and I know some of the questions changed over time, which one would expect, but there are some questions though that have been largely consistent and exactly the same actually as they were when it started. And have you any reflections on that sort of longitudinal trend that you would have seen over the five surveys?
I think the key bits here really are around understanding the pressures. You read it in the news, we see it all the time about the challenges of cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, and other things. But you can see it in the data, in people's responses, and it's whilst anecdotally it's great to know that these things are still challenges and therefore you can put things in place, but actually having some hard statistics, some numbers against it, and being able to track actually when we started the survey coming out of COVID and we're going through COVID, you can see how things have dipped, but you can actually start to see those, I suppose, green shoots of optimism coming back in again as we're hopefully seeing the back of the cost of living crisis as things are falling. The challenge with all of these is about how do you make sure that what you're then putting in place seeps through to business, and doing these waves allows us to test that sentiment at 6 monthly intervals so that you can keep on top of it and tweak or change approaches as necessary. And so, the longitudinal data is really, really important to show, yes, it is tracking sentiment that you see in the news, etc., but it's putting hard numbers on it for businesses in Belfast, not just in Belfast. So it is very localized. It's understanding the local marketplace.
Yeah, no, that's useful. And it's very fresh. It only finished 2 weeks ago, and here we are giving the results, which is a big thing for me, because to be honest with you, when you're looking at these surveys, quite often, by the time you're looking at it, with the pace of change that we're all going through, it's somewhat dated and almost partly irrelevant then. So it's hot off the press, this, and I know that the full results will be out in the coming days and shared with everybody. Just a couple of questions then, guys, if I can. I think, Kirsty, this is really one for you. How do the participating businesses compare to former surveys? That is to say, Is it the same companies across the same industries or sectors?
So it's not necessarily the same companies. We have a database that we go to and we use, and we make sure they're reflective and weighted back to ONS so that it's comparable, but it's not the same ones every time. But we've got a long list of businesses we invite to fill in the survey, and there is opt-outs as well, so if people don't have time or they don't want to get contacted, they can choose not to do it, or if they don't want to receive it in the future, that's fine, they can unsubscribe. So there's they don't have to do it, but it's great that people take the time to fill in the survey and give us their thoughts.
And what about the sectoral representation? Would that have changed anyway, Kirsty, through the time? We saw it was quite a good representation this time across a number of sectors. Is that sort of broadly consistent with what we would see? I suppose, is that a kind of a good sample, one would say, of the Belfast economy?
Yeah, so we make sure it's representative of the Belfast economy. So we will weight the data to be reflective there. So that is.
And just to add to that, the reason why we have two methodologies: we do an online survey first, which is self-selection. People choose whether or not to participate in that. We then profile those that have responded on the online survey, and we can see potentially where some sectors may be underrepresented. We'll then follow up with telephone surveys to try and bolster those particular sectors so that we're getting that more representative view from businesses, which is why we take those two different approaches. But then the data is invariably weighted at the end back to the profile of known businesses based on ONS data.
Okay, yeah. And then in terms of that too, in terms of so there would be new members that contributed, or new participants that contributed this time that may not have contributed in the past, therefore?
Absolutely, yeah. It is a survey that's distributed by email, where we know that, and we lease that information from Experian's database of businesses, which is GDPR opted-in data, and it basically goes out to those on that database, asking them to participate. And as I say, we then do that telephone follow-up for more targeted sector analysis.
Very good. I've no other questions here, just in the Q&A at the moment. So I was just going to ask, first of all, thank you to everybody for listening, participating, and to all the panel here, and MEL for conducting the work. I suppose for me, the big thing is, given the economic headwinds that do exist and the challenging times that we're all in, certainly to see the survey really shine through with that resilience that we have in the Belfast city economy, and also the optimism are there two real highlights for me. So it's really good to see. If there are any questions or follow up afterwards, certainly myself, Claire Guinness, CEO of Belfast Chamber, and Kieran Higgins from Belfast City Council are more than happy to engage with any of you. But it just remains for me to say now, thanks very much. Oh, sorry, David, did you have your hand up again?
Sorry, Claire, there is one question in the chat, which is there anyone we can speak to regarding the challenges faced, such as staff wellbeing? So there is some follow-up there just around services that maybe the Chamber or the Council or the partners may be able to provide some information.
Sorry, it just came in there as I was talking. So no, we will indeed follow up with that directly. I don't have nothing just straight off the top of my head at the moment on that, but I know that there will be and can be, so we will follow up with that directly. Okay. Kieran, you're on mute there, are you?
Yes, on mute. No, I was just going to say I'm happy to follow up by email directly with that person who made that query there. So it's, I don't know, maybe will I put my email address in the chat? Or
yes, that would be great if you would just put the email address in the chat, and I'll do the same.
Or maybe in the Q&A, is that? Yeah.
The Q&A, yeah, it's in the Q&A actually, not the chat.
Yeah, hang on, type answer.
Yeah, that would be great, Kieran. They'll find you anyway on the through the Belfast City Council website, I'm sure.
Yeah,
easy to find people these days.
Yeah, economic development. Yeah, that's our contact details. And yeah, so we'll send around the summary report then in the coming day, or we can send around this slide deck, but we'll make the report available on the council and chamber website. And then there's also previous reports as well. So if anyone wants to look back and compare with some of the other reports from the other survey waves we've done, they're available as well, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say
thank
thank you. Let's just reconfirm what you said, Claire. Thanks to everybody for joining the webinar. Thanks very much as well for any of the stakeholders who are there that have helped distribute the survey and to kind of bring it to the attention of their members. And I'll be in touch again for the next wave, you know. And well, I'm sorry, thanks Karen, Kirsty, and David as well for crunching the numbers and giving us your views on the results, you know. Yeah,
there's a lot more analysis goes in than comes across in the slides. I must say it's a very professionally completed survey. And a final word, so thanks everybody from me. And I should say too that you don't need to wait for the next survey if there is a pressing business issue in Belfast Chambers always got open ears for that. Okay, thanks very much everybody.